We're going to continue with today's session. Please have a seat.
Vamos a continuar con la...
We're going to continue with the session, as I was saying, after the coffee break. We will have the rest of students coming into the room in the coming minutes. The next session is about towards European citizenship, the fundamental values of the European Union. Francesco Bestagno will give the speech. He's the legal advisor at the permanent representation of Italy to the European Union. Then we have Léonce Bekemans, professor of Monnet, and we'll have the moderation by Pierpaolo Camadini. Thank you very much. Thank you. I would like to thank the Paul VI Foundation and its speakers that invited my institution in this event that I believe it's expressing, it's really giving very fruitful debates, and it's pointing to a very homogeneous increase, because we went from historical memory, from the rediscovery of what was the conception that Paul VI had of Europe and how it has inspired European values. And we've gone through a first encounter with those concrete principles that are characterizing a different century, because we're talking about the 9th and 19th century, but now we're in a new millennium. So I believe that this event is particularly fruitful. And we are going to continue along this path by focusing on two different topics. First of all, the topic of the founding values of the European Union for solidarity among citizenship, so that we can understand this diversity and how it was able to find common roots, and how intercultural dialogue is the main tool for convergence around these values. These wonderful speakers that I'll be introducing to you shortly, well, I have to express them my gratitude, because they will be able to show us how, through law, values become codified rules that represent the identity of a plurality of subjects, and that represent the diversity of a cultural identity. I believe that this is a topic that has always characterized the European debate, and maybe nowadays is even more so. But which are the values that give life to European identity, and what do they imply when it comes to national and global challenges? I believe that I will be particularly attention to how to balance pluralism and identity without discrediting our identity values. This is part of our European thought, taking into account that we cannot forget a violent secularization that had an impact on the roots of European culture, that is Christianity, something that we had taken for granted. And over the last century, this has undergone great evolutions. Nowadays, we see this subjectivity of rights. We all have rights, but what about responsibilities and duties? Our culture seems to want to have rights prevailing. And of course, we delve into this when we mentioned the European bishops and when we remembered Paul VI. But it seems that there is a willingness to make these rights prevail. But we need to recognize a soul in our Europe, because otherwise Europe won't have much to say when it comes to global challenges and national emergencies. And here I'm going to briefly quote, in order to remember, as we did remember Paul VI, another layperson who was a socialist French author. And he was someone who profoundly experienced European responsibilities. Jacques Delors, that in 1999, when we were trying to define the introduction of a European constitution that should be an identity and spiritual framework, I dare say, well, Delors talked about the need to infuse Europe with a soul. And then we took another route, and here we are to judge the results of that different route. And on this regard, I'd like to quote a book by two Italian philosophers who have published a small book, which is Europe Without Soul, Politics, Christianity, and Science. And they actually make a comparative study with St. Augustine. And it was published by a publishing house that had Montini as the founders. So here we have the magnitude of the social value of Christian roots, as St. Augustine used to say. So without recognizing the value of Christian culture as the foundation for Europe, we renounce to civil cohabitation based on social cohesion, which are the foundations for liberalism, of liberal culture, that is the foundation for the rule of law. The path taken by European institutions in past decades has taken us to believe that we have created a European citizenship. The direct election of the Parliament of 79 made us hope that the next step would be taken really fast. But then we had the insurgence of nationalism, as we heard before. And all of this is causing the fragmentation of Europe that seems to be soulless at the moment. But we have the urgency of these challenges because nowadays international global context doesn't allow us any room to give up on this future of Europe. So we need to enter a more pragmatic and even more spiritual dimension so that we can give rise to a European people. We might need to look how, starting from the intelligence, the heart of electors, we can give place to tools that can give place to unitary responses. I believe that these are the topics that will be covered by our speakers that I'm going to introduce you right now. We have Professor Francesco Bestagno. He's a legal advisor at the permanent representation of Italy to the European Union. He works at the Sacro Cuore University. He works for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He has published different studies and books about EU-related issues. And then we have Professor Léonce Bekemans. He's an economist and philosopher. I can see that philosophy and economy can go hand in hand. He's Belgian. He's passionate about European studies, and he particularly pays attention to the links between economy, society, and education. He was professor at the University of Bruges, and he does studies of human development other than being visiting professor in other academic institutions, and he's the author of several publications. He's an expert on the themes of education and intercultural dialogue. So these are very significant voices that will allow us to persist in this debate. And now I'd like to, without further ado, I would like to give them the floor. I'd like to remind all of our audience that you can participate in this debate through WhatsApp groups that you can send to 34659043 And now I leave the floor to Professor Bestagno. Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to thank my friend Pierpaolo Camadini. I would like to also thank the Paul VI Foundation and Institute, and I would also like to thank, after these first hours of this event that have been so fruitful and so full of ideas, so much so that many of the things that I wanted to mention today have been mentioned before. Well, I'd like to thank the organizers of this event. This is an event in which we have several languages that are spoken. I would like to thank interpreters for their work in this regard. And this is one of the aspects that conforms the identity of Europe, multilingualism. Multilingualism, I would say that the first website of the European Union featured all the 24 official languages, so allowed the public to surf the site in their language of choice. And this is the first aspect of closeness to citizenship, the fact that citizens can read material and can interact with institutions in their own languages. And then it relates to another issue. Language diversity is one of the aspects of the cultural heritage of Europe. This idea of language and cultural diversity is one of the characterizing traits of the EU. The motto of the European Union, unity in diversity, is a motto that refers to the idea of cultural diversity that is different from the motto of the United States. E pluribus unum. E pluribus unum refers more to a political unity. We don't have a political unity in Europe. We don't have a sovereign state. But this idea of diversity reflects from the very beginning the idea of respect for different cultures, different languages, the idea of welcoming people, including people. And this is one of the fundamental aspects of diversity and unity. We have unity in diversity. Unity, particularly from the point of view of common values, of founding values, of a European identity that is based on common values. And if we look at the EU treaty, the introduction of the EU treaty refers to the universal values, inalienable rights of people, of freedom, democracy, equality, and rule of law. And I've stressed the fact that we're talking about values of people and not individuals. And I wanted to stress it because this has very important implications on Christian thought. When we talk about universal values, we say that the parties having the inspiration of on the religious and cultural values have actually created or generated these values, and these have inspired the creation of Europe. So these values come from the cultural, religious, and humanist heritage of Europe. So it's pretty clear from the very introduction that the European project is not anchored in a secular perspective, but that there are immaterial religious and cultural values that are the foundation for those founding values for the EU. Now, my role, and this is how I've interpreted my presence over here, is to try to provide you with a perspective of those tools that are used in order to translate these values or to make them concrete. Other than this introduction, the treaty starts with the articles, the perceptive binding part of the treaty, with an Article 2 that refers to the founding values and says that the EU is based on the respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, rule of law. This is one of the main points of debate nowadays. And in the respect of human rights, including the rights of people who belong to minorities. Now, these values that are clearly announced are values that need to be shared by member states. And every single time we have a new state entering the Union, they are asked to respect these values. The EU is always demanding to be able to verify the respect for democracy, for human rights, and for the rule of law. These are identity characteristics of the Western world. They were born in the Western culture, and the EU reaffirms these values in the international scenario. And this is particularly important when we talk about third countries or countries that are trying to be part of the EU, because if we think of different approaches or how these approaches have changed from the founding countries to the countries that entered the Union afterwards or in 2024 with this considerable enlargement with 10 more states adding to this 15 first. 2004, I wanted to say, I'm so sorry. In 2004, we have this substantial enlargement to 25, and then in 2007 to 27 member states. In 2013, we had the membership of Croatia, and then we went from 28 to 27 when we had Brexit. But let's think about the spirit with which the EU was founded. The states that founded the EU have actually used an intuition, a fundamental intuition, which was how was important to give in certain quotas of sovereignty for the well-being of a community that would gather some of these member states. So it was about given in some of the national sovereignty to guarantee, first of all, safety, coexistence among different European states and peoples, and then in order to guarantee as well an economic and integration and economic growth. When in 2024, in 2004, the 10 states were introduced, for these states, entering the EU has meant a reaffirmation of their own sovereignty after decades in which their sovereignty had been comprised within the orbit of socialist parties. And this implies a different approach from the peoples of these countries and from their governments. In this regard, there was a moment in 2012 in which the president of the Commission back then, Barroso, in his speech about the State of the Union, there was a speech that each September the president of the Commission would do publicly. In that speech, President Barroso announced or denounced that there were growing dangers within the democratic and social fabric of the EU. In some member states. So we're talking about threats. And he denounced that there was a need to find tools to try to contain, first of all, the so-called backsliding of the rule of law, this erosion of the rule of law in some member states. And let me just say that even in June last year, the Court of Justice stated that the values of Article 2 that we read before are identity values for the EU, and the EU needs to find or needs to have the tools to defend such values. So, along this decade, we have seen how we try to find the right tools to make sure that 12 sovereign states can correct and prevent risks for the rule of law and democracy. Because the treaty previews some tools, but they're not enough. The treaty previews that the Commission can open infraction proceedings, can contest violations, and take a member state to the Court of Justice for all of the violations of the EU rule. And on several reasons. It can be, for example, environmental violations, labor violations, different kind of infringements. But the Commission has taken certain member states to the Court of Justice, even for violations of the founding values of the EU. And they start processing and condemning certain member states. For example, in 2021, we had an urgent ordinance of precautionary measures that urged Poland to stop the activities of a disciplinary camera for judges. So, of an initiative that would sanction judges, creating a chilling effect for judges that could be transferred or could be forced to retire. And the EU Justice issued an urgent measure with a sanction, a monetary sanction, to stop this activity. Then they said, well, they're reducing the activity, so the sanction that was 1 million euros, now it's going to be €500,000, and so forth. And you would say, Poland will never pay them. But if Poland doesn't pay them, then the EU doesn't provide them with funds. So financial sanctions are effective. So this is one of the instruments that the EU has through the Court of Justice. Another instrument is a process in virtue of Article 7 of the treaty, with which the Council could verify that there is a violation of the funding values of the member state and could suspend the rights of these member states. You could say, for example, now you cannot vote.
And this is what is called the nuclear option. There are two procedures from as of 2017 against Poland. It was then when the Commission opened the sanctionary procedure against Poland, and later another procedure was opened against Hungary. Decisions have not been made yet, but it is not because of lack of activity in the Commission. It is because they are discussing the sanctions, and they are discussing possible sanctions with the ministers. And as I say, these violations happened in 2017. However, there are other novelties which are also significant and which has received a lot of attention. I am referring to the regulation of the conditionality of the balance. That is to say, the rule for constitutional law, meaning that it is possible to suspend the funds, specific funds, to a member state, and that's what we refer to conditionality of budget to the member state because of a violation of the rule of law, and therefore creating a danger to the funding of the European Union. And this is precisely what happened in Hungary. So we are talking about December 2020, and its application comes from 2022. So the Court of Justice in Hungary presented an objection. However, finally it has been passed, and so now there is more consensus regarding the violation of the procedure. This refers to a question of tenders, of public tenders, and whether there are public tenders, European funds are usually included. So in that regard, the European Union has to follow or has to track the fundings. And this is important because different actors can take part in public tenderings. And when those tenders are awarded, then it is the European companies and European citizens that enjoy the rights coming from that award. And so financing and cohesion funds are significant in this regard, and this is precisely what has happened in Hungary. And Hungary now needs to show that it has amended the situation and that it has applied corrective measures. At the end of the day, it is the Council that decides upon violation or not violation by virtue of its qualified majority. So as we can see, this is a very sensitive discussion. Why is there a link? this link, so this interference of the public powers in public tenderings, well, because there is a direct link with financing, with European financing. In other procedures, there is no link of this type, and some judges have been complaining about interferences in Hungary between the political power and the judicial power. And this has created, logically, a decrease in the division of power. But in this case, the Commission could not show that there have been negative effects for the European Commission. Therefore, it has not suspended the financing, the European financing. So we can see the ramifications here of these measures, and Hungary implemented immediately afterwards 17 new laws, and Hungary has been continue applying and implementing different laws so as to adequate themselves to what has been denounced. Another example refers to a question regarding the local population in that country, and this refers to a city council in favor of LGBT ideology. Some statements were made in that regard regarding some placards and some banners, and following that, some provisions were entered which resulted in cutting of financing. So we can see that there is a regulation being applied here for the first time. And so when these funds are going to be used, they are linked to the respect of the fundamental rights and the division of powers. And this is also applicable or similar to the independence of the judges. This is of fundamental importance also to citizens, in the sense that a citizen can address a judge, always knowing that the judge would be independent in its ruling. Citizens can present a family matter before a judge, and can also present cases regarding minors, and therefore the independence of the judges there is essential. We are referring here to judges who would be independent from the central power, or cases of minors being abducted in some countries, which are those cases being ruled in other member states. So the idea of having common values that can be defended inside the member states and inside the European Union, we are defending also the international judicial opinions and rulings. And this strengthens the judicial power vis-à-vis third countries. And I'm concluding here. Another example refers to third countries that should respect some international pacts and agreements, and this is also fundamental. For instance, when the European Union suppresses tax borders, when some rules are not complied with. we are not talking about just sanctions imposed on two third countries. The European Union just tells third countries that if they want to enter into trade agreements with them, they have to respect the rules set forth by the United Nations, not only the European Union. So we are talking about a multidisciplinary approach here, so that these third countries are obliged to respect fundamental values and principles, and this is enshrined in the Treaty of 1957, and the term culture is referred to in the treaties in relation to third countries, meaning historical relationships between the European Union and third countries. This is a way of guaranteeing a cultural, political, and historical development in those countries. This idea is effectively related to Paul VI's thinking, meaning the integral development of the people and the individuals. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much to Professor Bestagno for his presentation. He has provided us with a very interesting overview of the complexity of common European values. And he has also talked about the complexity of defending those rights at European level. I don't know if Professor Bekemans would like to add something, whether these values represent a strong identity or whether it is a complexity that resists that by conciliating and by reconciling different cultures and in a significant manner for all of us. So now I would like to give the floor to Professor Léonce Bekemans, who will talk to us about intercultural dialogue. Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
So thank to the organizers to being invited to this international conference. Especially thanks to Professor Domingo Suguayinis, certainly for the coherence of the program. Really, congratulations from my part. And also to the organization to helping me out to retrace my PowerPoint presentation and my text after this unsatisfactory event yesterday. I was a little bit lost, I was saying. Okay, my talk, in a certain sense, is a logical consequence of what Professor Francesco Bestagno has said, was rather, I would say, seen from a legal perspective. But I will say my intervention goes broader, is a bit more comprehensive, probably also a bit more voluntaristic, but I feel much in line of what already has been said before. So you see here my title of my talk, A Values-Driven Approach to the European Union, Active Citizenship and Intercultural Dialogue. And you can already see from the images what are my fundamental points. Dialogue, civil dialogue, political dialogue, intercultural dialogue, we talk. And in the talk we have and we're using different words, and words have stories behind. And dialogue, we can disagree with each other, but we can disagree in a civilized way. And in the middle, there is an image I found in the University of Salamanca, where we as Christians and Catholics, we should stick out our neck. We should not remain in our comfort zone. We have to be active partner, actor in the ongoing dialogue in the European integration process, to go out. So I always start an intervention with some of the premises, I think, which to me are important and which are, I think, much linked to what was said by previous speakers. The values on which the European integration process are based respond to or are integral part of the European Union identity. Means we have, as an individual, as a person, we have multiple identities, not exclusive. I'm from Bruges, I'm a Flemish, I'm a Belgian, I'm a European. And that's part, and those values, it has been said, human dignity, common good, freedom, solidarity, peace, and so on, they are parts, integral part of the European Union identity. Second important element of this value-driven approach is that the founding principles of the social doctrine of the Church, very much said in a number of papal encyclicals, really are part of the, I would say, of the foundation treaties of the European Union. So we should not forget that. They are part, let's say, of the origin and the development. And third element of the value-driven approach is we are basing our approach on a community-driven personalism in Europe. Of course, there are different interpretations. And I mentioned Thomas d'Aquino, Jacques Maritain, Emmanuel Mounier, Robert Schuman, Paulo VI, Jacques Delors, and so on. Bauman, which was already mentioned, Habermas. So we are in this kind of, call it, conceptual environment. Personalism, different interpretation. The person is in the center of political decision-making. And of course, that was already said by Francesco, this Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union. I put it here because it's fundamental in understanding the application, the implementation of the political decision-making process. And I cite because it's good to recall, the Union is founded on the values of respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities. These values are common. So it's part of this European Union identity. These values are common to the member states in a society in which pluralism, non-discrimination, tolerance, justice, solidarity, and equality between women and men prevail. It's there. We have a legal institutional base for everything what's happened behind. And then the third premise, which is a very interesting report published in 2022, published by the European Commission's Legal Service, which shows the importance of law in the integration process. 70 years of European Union law, a union for its citizens, dealing how to integrate step by step through law, through output legitimacy. Having said that, I'm coming to my outline of my talk, and I want to address 4 aspects briefly in a structured way. First of all, a few words about the human-centric approach to European community building. Second, the European citizenship building. It's a process. It's a camino, with a lot of complexities and hindrances to suppress, but it's a process. And I show that there is a road towards European citizenship. A third aspect that I want to just explore very briefly is the citizens' dialogue within the European Union. Some things have already mentioned in the previous panel, but I want to just to focus on a number of initiatives. The European Union is also trying to deal with initiatives and programs on the citizens' dialogue. And the fourth and last final aspect is the importance of intercultural dialogue in the European Union. Just quickly, what I consider as the basic fundamentals of a human-centric approach. We have them here. First of all, the human rights paradigm, meaning implying the importance of the indivisibility and the interdependence of human rights, be it social, political, cultural rights. They're all interconnected. Very much, I know, with the annex in the Treaty of Lisbon, it's part of the implementation. So, human rights paradigm, first major, and I come to that in the specificity later on. The second major fundamental of our human-centric approach is what I call the cosmopolitan perspective of multi-level governance. What does it mean? The state, the nation-state, is not any longer the only actor in international relations. That doesn't mean that we have to be excluded. It's part of a whole, I would say, mosaic of actors. From the neighborhood to the region, nation, Europe, and global. And it depends on which issues are be treated, what will be the solution be proposed, multi-level governance. So borders are important, but they are not walls. And certain issues cannot be solved on a regional or a national, not even on a European, on a global level. That is my third point. There are a number of global, what I call public goods, which needs a different kind of management of international relations, which needs international cooperation in order to deal with health issues, with security that cannot be solved on a regional level or a national level, and sometimes not on a European level. And that might lead, this fact that we recognize that there are a number of global public goods, that means that probably we need a different kind of democracy in dealing with. It's a process. So, we come now to the second aspect, the process of European citizenship building. Four elements that I want to briefly address. First of all, we see that the concept of citizenship has been changing over time. Before the Treaty of Maastricht, we were, in international relations, we were dealing with the Westphalian system. States are the only actors in international relations. And the classical concept of citizenship meant nationality equals citizenship equals identity. Nation state, the only actor in the international relations. That has been changing step by step. There are some challenges to the nation state as the only actor, and to the nation-state citizenship equivalent to nationality. Globalization, as I said, the process of globalization is challenging the role of the state, because state in certain issues can not any longer solve the issues. You have to go to a higher level, intergovernmentalism or supranationalism, what is the name? And also the fact that our societies become de facto multicultural societies. Different religions, different cultures living peacefully, not peacefully, they live together in the same kind of context. What does that mean? And then we come to our third point, how the European Union has acted on that. See that there is a kind of process, a road to European citizenship building. There's a historical development. Roads towards launching. And we start, Rome Treaty. there was a kind of economic, purely, exclusively economic interpretation of citizenship. Freedom of, if there was a kind of economic motivation, but not the general, I would say, civil rights, for freedoms. And then, that was me. And then slowly we see a number of initiatives when the citizenship concept word becomes propping up into the language of the European, very slowly, very modestly. 1974, the then Prime Minister of Belgium, Léonce Bekemans, he published the report Europe of Citizens. And the Europe of Citizens had a major objective to increase the European awareness with citizens, to bring, I would say, Europe closer to. And there were some propositions made. 1974. 1976, we have the first elections of the European Parliament. So you see, step by step, we're adding an element in this citizenship building. Spinelli projects. Important momentum is the Treaty of Maastricht, 1992, where for the first time we institutionalize in a treaty the concept of European citizenship. It is institutionalized. It has a legal status. It was not very, I would say, broadly defined in the later treaties with Amsterdam and with Nice. There were some more specificity dealing with human rights and so on. And now we have the Lisbon Treaty, where as a legal annex, we have the Charter for Human Rights, legally binding. So we see a kind of step-by-step building up for European Union citizenship. What does that mean in reality, these different steps, historical steps? It means that if we are talking on a European level on active, proactive citizenship, that it has to develop in a kind of new framework, not of a framework of a closed state, closed member states within a given territory, but open beyond borders of nations. And then you see some political scientists are dealing with the possible speculative development of a transnational democracy, but the seeds are there. Second implication, we are dealing with plural citizenship. Plural citizenship means it covers a multiplicity of nationality. You don't have to give up, and that was already said, your own nationality, your own identity, because you are a member of one of the member states. So it has an added value, called it so. And then, okay, the final, I would say, concept of conclusion is that we have a common European citizenship, implying multiple state citizenships and multiple different cultural identities. So breaking completely the conceptual link of the Westphalian system of nationality, identity, citizenship. You can be a Belgian, you can be a Flemish, and at the same time, with rights and duties, you are a European, not exclusive, inclusive. So just, okay, that's the conceptual structure. I just want to, there have been, and it was already mentioned in some of the speakers before, there are a number of initiatives, practices that the European Union has launched. One was, and it was already mentioned, this European Citizens Initiative, which is an important, with all the criticism attached to that, an important legal participatory instrument. Up to now, bit less than 80 initiatives have been registered. Only 6 have been successful, because there are very rigid conditions attached to that. And the last one was a drinking water directive in 2021. You have a Europe of Citizens program already from 2004, 2020. Now within the new multi-financial framework program. The Citizens program is integrated in the very broad European Union rights and values program in the 21-27 multi-annual framework. In order, because the whole idea was increasing awareness, but also fight contracting populism, radical, I would say, political decision-making. So the whole program has been a specific focus. There are every 3 years the citizens' reports, which gives a kind of overview of the progress which is made from the European Union perspective. Interesting, in 2017, the Committee of the Region, an important actor in this partnership building between the different institutions, published a report, The Outreach to Citizens, not about us, with us, again focusing on the dialogue. And the regional element is very important. I refer to the political agenda for Europe, already mentioned before the break, the conference on the future of Europe, with May 22, the conclusions. An important idea which has come forward is this citizens' assemblies, in order that citizens in the kind of semi-structured platform can deal via multilingual digital platform, can discuss certain issues. There's a kind of follow-up, which we have to see what will happen after the elections, but 9 topics have been identified. And there are also other specific instruments to find the concrete elements of this European citizenship building. And the Eurobarometer often publicizes surveys about the identity of the European. There's a citizenship portal, and there's the European Citizenship Action Service. Yeah, it's because it's stick to here. But yeah, okay. We move to a third aspect, the citizens' dialogue in the European Union. Okay, now I went to 4. Yeah. Whenever we talk about a specific issue within the European integration process, we always need to well contextualize what's happening. And I just here mention a number of elements which are part of this contextualization process. We talked about the complexity, the interconnection between and within our societies. We don't have any longer homogeneous societies. We are living de facto in multicultural societies. We are living in a world with globalized power, but still importance of the territorial dimension. In a fragmented society, what I already said, the state is not any longer the exclusive actor of the system. We deal with multiple identities. There's this kind of democratic deficit between citizens and institutions, with a generalized distrust, uncertainty. And I always stress on that. We have, as academics, as scholars, as teachers, we have an important role in the education to inspire, motivate the younger generation to believe in the European projects with all the difficulties. And of course, apart from the general context, we also have a specific citizen-centric context. There is the slow shift from an exclusively representative democracy to more what is called a participatory and deliberative democracy. The growing role of civil society. And also there, the European Union has come up with some programs. Importance of the social media. How do we deal with the social media? How to manage the social media? How to facilitate civic participation? And how to manage it that we keep the positive consequences for the democratic legitimacy. From the context, again, we are not talking in a void, we're talking about the basic is the legal context, the legal basis for citizens' dialogue. And I just refer to the major articles in the treaty which are dealing with a representative and participative democracy. So we have all the legal elements. Often what is lacking is the political goodwill to use. We have Article 10 of the treaty on representative democracy. The functioning of the Union is based on representative democracy. Article 11 is dealing with participatory democracy. And then it gives the specific conditions how participatory democracy should be developed. Article 17 introduces a dialogue between European institutions and churches. So there is a legal reference in order to build up the citizens' dialogue. And from this citizens' dialogue and from this legal context, we see that some initiatives also in the citizens' dialogue have been proposed. Practices of participatory European citizenship. I just mentioned and list some practices which have been only recently, on the last 20 years, some initiatives have been developed. There was a European white paper on European governance, stressing establishing more democratic forms of governments at all levels. There's a civil dialogue of European social non-governmental organizations. There is a Riga process of participation, very much a roadmap which is established in order to deal with the civil dialogue. There are regional action plans and so on. The last is the intercultural dialogue in the European Union. Here, if we are dealing with intercultural dialogue, my point of departure is that intercultural dialogue, what was said before already, is a way to manage cultural diversity. And cultural diversity should not be seen, perceived only as a fact, as a right, but should be taken care as an economic, social, political added value. That's okay. That's the point of departure. And of course, quite some, and certainly the Council of Europe has done quite some work on the intercultural dialogue with its own white paper. How do we define? How do I define intercultural dialogue? And I was part of a project organized by the Anna Lund Foundation on intercultural education. And we published a handbook of how to deal in classes at universities with intercultural education. Very fascinating exercise. Certainly, if you are discussing with the two sides of the Mediterranean, they have different ideas about dialogue and about education. So, intercultural dialogue, there is a given context, and there's again a legal framework in order to, that the European Union can do a number of initiatives in the area of intercultural dialogue. I refer to Article 2, 3, and 6, and of course the Charter of Fundamental Rights. How do we assess that, this intercultural dialogue building up? Culture should be seen, and I'm very much convinced of that, should be seen as a driving force for genuine intercultural dialogue. And here Europe has a responsibility in dialogue, in promoting dialogue between and within societies, between different cultural discourses. Of course, point of departure, as I mentioned, is the human rights paradigm should be the point of departure for intercultural dialogue. And also here, there are a number of practices which are not going, and I'm come to the conclusion. So, first conclusion, despite all the criticism that one can have to the European integration process and the failures and the imperfections of its integration process, there is a European model, I believe that, a European model of democracy, community and participation through promoting active citizenship building. It's not static, it's building. And still believe that that model within our uncertain globalized world is still a very valid project for defining the European bene comune, the European common good, and part of the global common good, and for developing what the European integration process, a sui generis model of integration, of developing a unique institution, operational functionalness. From theory, we have to go to practice, in which citizens are important actors of true democratic governance based on the rule of law. Of course, you need a number of conditions. You have to accept the rules of the game. You have to accept the grounded rules on which the European Union has built the values. Discussion with Hungary, and to which extent can you permit a state not following these principles? And for me, that's very important, and I want to testimony that in all what I did in my career as a Jean Monnet professor. There needs to be a will to solve problems together. We learn by doing together, and that's really also linked to the students. We need to have a positive, basic attitude towards the challenging we are in front of. Importance of l'esprit européen. And this l'esprit européen was very much evoked by the founding fathers and so on, but important. Second conclusion, the process of European integration process demonstrates from the very beginning, and it should continue, that the social doctrine of the Church and this human integral concept of the person was, but also should be and is a source of inspiration and a transforming force for the European model. And of course, as a last point, as an academic, as a teacher, in that the fundamental role of education for democracy, participation, and community. So, thanks. Where there is no vision, people perish. The Proverb 28 paragraph. A sense of Europe from within. A tree, and a European bent tree to dialogue. It's the cover page of my forthcoming book. So, a sense of Europe from within. Thanks a lot, and
Grazie mille per questo excursus.
Thank you very much for this speech that took us back to collect all of this conversation from the very beginning till the end. It's very important to mention the importance of the European spirit and the fact that Christianity has a lot to say for the European culture. And this is something that links us back to the debate that we are going to delve into later on this afternoon. Now, before wrapping up, I need to read a question that was sent to us. And the question is, what's your opinion for the fact that the European Court of Justice wants to confer legal value to founding values and therefore takes on the competence to defend them beyond the provisions of the treaty, whether this is legitimate or if the European Court of Justice isn't going beyond its limitations? Shouldn't we have a legislative amendment or reform? Thank you to whoever asked the question. And thank you for giving to me beforehand so that I could think and reflect about my answer. while Léonce was making this wonderful speech. Thank you, Léonce. So what I wanted to say is that the question is, the Court of Justice is called to provide value to these values, and it's not proper to ask the court to do so. Well, my answer is that in general terms, it is not the Court of Justice's duty to do so, but often is the legislator at the EU that already in the rules that are elaborated provides value or meaning to these values. Thinking of Article 2 that we've covered, where Article 2 refers to funding values. It describes the rule of law. What is the rule of law? Well, the EU legislator needed to provide this value of meaning and did so in the regulation on conditionality that I mentioned before that was approved in 2020, because before reading the text that the EU legislator has approved and turned binding, and that it's so important, what we need to pay attention to is the idea that public power is not absolute. It's not absolutus. It's not legibus absolutus. It's not a power that can be exercised arbitrarily. It's not sovereign. It's not above the law, but it's the law that it's above public power. So the idea of rule of law, rule refers to ruling, the government of law. It's the sovereignty of law. But translating this concept is difficult. It's true that if it was the Court of Justice's duty to establish what is the rule of law, we would be before a Court of Justice going beyond its duties. But the EU legislator and the EU co-legislators that are the EU Parliament, that is democratically elected by all citizens of the Union, and the European Council that contains the representatives of the governments of member states that are part of democratic states themselves, has specified in this regulation that the rule of law, and let me just quote where I'm going to summarize it because it's a long disposition, that the rule of law imposes that all public powers act within the limits established by the law in line with the values of democracy and in respect of funding values such as those is set forth in the treaty. So there is another text that was written that establishes such fundamental rights under the control of jurisdictional entities that have to be impartial and independent. So laws needs to be respected after a transparent, pluralistic process, and then we need to assert the prohibition of arbitrarity by executive institutions and the principle of separation of powers, as I was mentioning in the case of the regulation with regard to Hungary. It was the principle of separation of powers and the interference of the government, both in the activity of public administration as on the organs that judge on subcontractors. It was exactly this principle that took us to that regulation. So sorry, this was a very long explanation to demonstrate that how both the EU legislator, is making these principles concrete. There might be cases in which we might find gaps from legislator, but in general terms, this doesn't happen or should not happen. Thank you, and I believe that, having said that, we're going to conclude a wonderful morning, and now we're going to take a break. Thank you very much, everyone.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. We're being very punctual. We're only 4 minutes late. I believe that after such a fruitful morning, this is reasonable. We're going to have lunch here down in the place where we had the coffee break. Thank you very much.